This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Lokwe with tonight's top stories. A good deal in the offing. The US president hinting at agreement with China on trade and a meeting with Xi Jinping before year's end if a pact is sealed. Japan and South Korea on edge with no clear indication from the US when it might make good on its promise to ease their auto tariffs. Several detentions, but authorities in Taiwan still probing motives and the scope of an alleged theft of tech secrets at chip giant TSMC. China repeats intent to contribute to maintaining the truce between Thailand and Cambodia. The two sides in ongoing talks with Beijing dispatching its own representative for final sessions tomorrow. Landslides, flooding and mosquito-borne disease. The monsoon not sparing southern China with more typhoons forecast this month. Also ahead on East Asia Tonight, Hiroshima marks 80 years since its atomic bombing, amid concerns over growing nuclear arsenals and their possible use in warfare. The US and China may be closing in on a trade deal. That's according to President Donald Trump. Mr. Trump was also expected to meet his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping before the end of the year if they come to an agreement. Mr. Trump speaking to CNBC, adding the U.S. is getting along with China very well and emphasized that he has a good relationship with President Xi. China yet to comment on those remarks from Mr. Trump. Recently, Beijing expressed support for Brazil in resisting what it described as bullying behavior of the U.S. in imposing excessive tariffs, adding that it opposes, quote, unreasonable external interference in Brazil's internal affairs. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent also saying there are, quote, makings of a deal with Beijing following talks in Stockholm last week. Chinese officials say the two sides have agreed to extend the pause on new tariff hikes, although Washington has yet to confirm this. The new tariff deal deadline is next Tuesday. Without an agreement, Washington could trigger a new round of punitive levies or other trade restrictions. The U.S. and China reached preliminary deals in May and June, which ended escalating tit-for-tat tariffs and a cutoff of rare earth minerals. A monsoon season in southern China reaching its peak, the region bracing for extreme rainfall following some of its worst downpours this century. Rescue teams in Guangdong province rushing to clear flooded streets after intense rain set off mudslides and felled trees, leaving cables and infrastructure exposed to the elements. Authorities have enacted a level 4 disaster relief response in the province. The downpour in the provincial capital, Guangzhou, was its second heaviest rainfall for August this century. Forecasters warning of more thunderstorms, prolonging weeks of atmospheric chaos in China that began last month. Meanwhile, life in Hong Kong getting back to normal a day after the city was dumped with its heaviest August rainfall since 1884. A storm yesterday bringing the financial hub to a near standstill. Its highest level alert, the black rainstorm warning, was in place for more than 11 hours, making it the second longest such alert put in place ever. The Hong Kong Observatory lifting all warnings today. Our CNN's May Wong joining us live from Hong Kong. May the most severe alert, now that has been lifted, but recovery is ongoing.
Indeed, recovery is ongoing, but to be honest with you, a lot of people that I spoke to say things are looking very, very normal right now. Roads are clear in terms of debris have been all cleared up as well, because they say that they have actually seen and witnessed the fact that officials have been out and about clearing these, damage, so to speak, that were caused by the rain, and they've been working overtime and in overdrive, deploying many teams and many officials out there in order to resolve the problem. As you mentioned earlier, life is back to normal. As you can see right now, well, people are out and about in this particular area because they're conducting their regular walks, their regular jogs in the evening. And really, if you had just flown into Hong Kong today, you wouldn't even have noticed or realized that on Tuesday they had actually issued this massive black rain warning to say that there was severe thunderstorms happening in this particular city. So as you can see as well, the ferry behind me, it's particularly ongoing in terms of its services. Unlike previously during the typhoon about 3 weeks ago, Typhoon Weeper, all the ferry services had to stop. Flights had to be cancelled, but this time around, none of the flights were cancelled. They were only delayed, and everything have actually resumed already. So this only goes to show you that this is not a first rodeo for Hong Kong, because the people as well as the authorities are very, very accustomed to this kind of a weather situation. Every year on a annual basis, they do have all these warnings about severe thunderstorms. They do have warnings about typhoons coming in this direction. So the authorities are prepared. They've mobilized a lot of the units, emergency teams to stand by. Earlier as well today, before I go, is the fact that when I saw this mini landslide happening in front of a primary school, I also witnessed that landslide emergency officials were on site to assess the situation and to see how they can rectify it and to repair the place as soon as possible. And very quickly as well, when I spoke to the official, he said that they were looking at more severe areas and tackle those first before coming to areas that are not so disruptive to traffic and to the lives of people. So you can see that the authorities are on top of things, and the people here are really confident in the work that has been carried out.
Oh, May, of course, as you say, not the first rodeo for Hong Kong authorities, and certainly not the last rodeo either. In fact, all the reports we carry pretty much every week suggest that human-induced climate change will make weather events like these more intense and also more frequent. So Hong Kong may be prepared now, but it needs to be prepared for something even more severe in possibly the very near future.
Indeed, a lot of people that I spoke to, they do seem to be rather concerned about this global warming and climate change. In fact, they were not highlighting the rain. They were highlighting how hot Hong Kong has been. They have noticed, obviously, the fluctuations in terms of one day it's really, really hot and the next day it's pouring rain. So they have noticed that visibly. And obviously, they say that they believe that the authorities are looking into this. They believe that the authorities are tackling this. And we have also seen how the authorities have stepped up in terms of using artificial intelligence, for example, in weather forecasting. And that allows them a little bit more of an in-depth, a little bit more of an intelligence in terms of looking and predicting the weather changes. And also that will allow them to perhaps alert the people a lot earlier and a lot faster as well. In addition to that, the authorities have also prepared equipment in order to tackle, for example, severe rainstorms. Like on Tuesday, they have deployed all these powerful water pumping machines. They call them water pumping dragons because they are mobile. They pump a lot more water, and that has also helped to alleviate some of the flooding situation in parts of the city. So these are just signs that the authorities are fully aware of what's going on. They are stepping up on their activities and also on their equipment to try and tackle future problems that they may encounter. But again, climate change, global warming is something that not just Hong Kong is dealing with, but many countries are dealing with. And so this city is also trying to work around it and trying to educate and inform the public as much as they can.
It's quite normal, but then unexpected. I think the government should do more maintenance and to observe all this kind of rocks stuff, and then to do better to prevent this kind of things happen again. We didn't arrange anything in these few days, but then I heard they joined the summer course, they get cancelled and then not get, they can't get refunds. So yeah, for them.
Past 10 years, I think they are getting better and better, as I can see, but like I said, you can always do even better. I think there can be more maintenance and regular checkup on roads or draining system, on tree heavy tree or older tree, they should maintain it better, like putting something they can hold on to it, so it's not so easy to fall off.
Authorities are ready to handle any more adverse weather conditions. But honestly, over the next couple of days, well, the observatory has already sounded people to say that it's going to be actually pretty sunny over the weekend.
All right, extremes of weather there in Hong Kong. CNA's Mei Wong covering that for us in Hong Kong. Oh, heavy rains in Hong Kong and mainland China stoking fears of a spread of the mosquito-borne virus chikungunya. Experts calling for more mosquito traps and reminders of the dangers of stagnant water. In Hong Kong, records show fairly extensive mosquito breeding in 70% of surveyed areas. The city recording its first imported chikungunya case this week. On the mainland, more than 7,000 cases have been reported in the southern province of Guangdong. Hardest hit is Foshan City, authorities rolling out measures similar to those seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, with those infected sent to, quote, quarantine wards for a week, or at least until they test negative. Drones being used to detect mosquito breeding grounds. Chikungunya is rarely fatal, but it does cause fever and severe joint pain. Heavy rains in South Korea as well, with the nation bracing for more downpours this week. The greater Seoul area and parts of Gangwon province are expecting up to 100 millimeters of rain today, while up to 80 millimeters may fall over the provinces of Chungcheong, Jeolla and Gyeongsang. Met Services forecast rain clouds to travel south, warning of more downpours in the southern parts of the country. Authorities warning residents against using roads near rivers and streams that may burst their banks in this rainfall. South Korea has been experiencing extreme rain in the past month, which has left dozens dead and forced thousands to flee to safety. Meanwhile, Japan is scorching under temperatures going past 40 degrees Celsius for several days now. The central region sweltered at 41 degrees Celsius. That is the 7th day this year the mercury has gone past the 40-degree mark, a record initially set in 2018. The country reporting its highest ever temperature of 41.8 degrees in Isesaki City today. Officials urging the public to take precautions against heat stroke, advising them to use air conditioners, drink fluids and rest frequently if they are taking outdoor activities. Extreme heat, not just a public concern, some agricultural production also affected. Vegetables and rice farmers dealing with slower yield due to high temperatures and a lack of rain. Just yesterday, the Japanese Prime Minister announcing measures to support farmers and to boost rice production, including access to new technology. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, Tokyo's top trade negotiator heads to the US again to secure promised cuts on auto tariffs. On what's at stake for Japan's car industry and the wider economy, we check in with an expert. And more on the alleged theft of TSMC's chip secrets. The focus now on who the suspects may have been stealing for. This time, your business update with Roland Lim, because Roland, tariffs, general uncertainty, but more focused uncertainty on when the US might move to actually concretely cut tariffs on the auto industry.
Right, you are ways to South Korea, Japan, seeking answers from the US over when it will follow through with its pledge to reduce their auto tariffs. Now, cars make up a major part of their exports, and any delay in tariff relief could weigh heavily on their economies.
미국은 상호관세 수정 행정명령을 통해 8월 7일부터 한국에 15% 관세를 적용할 예정입니다. 다만 자동차 관세 인하 시행 시기에 대해서는 미측과 추가 협의가 필요합니다.
President Donald Trump said last week that the U.S. will charge a 15% tariff on imports from South Korea, including autos. The same pledge was made to Japan. Its top tariff negotiator is heading to Washington today to press Mr. Trump to bring the autos tariff cut into effect quickly. As part of the deal, the White House says Tokyo will lift restrictions on American cars, including accepting U.S. vehicle safety standards. President Trump telling CNBC that Japan will start importing Ford's chunky F-150 pickup trucks, saying that he's sure it'll do very well there. Well, for more on this story, we're joined now by Jesper Cole. He is Expert Director at Monex Group. Join us live from Tokyo. Jesper, good to have you on the show. What's really at stake here for Japan's economy if the U.S. actually holds back on the promised tariff cuts?
Look, I mean, there's an immediate effect, obviously, on the Japanese car companies and the Japanese car suppliers. You've got to remember that Toyota alone, is approximately 8 to 9% of the Japanese economy. And it is the uncertainty of not knowing what is going on, what is the tariff charge going to be, that obviously makes corporate planning for Toyota and for the domestic supply chain very, very uncertain. And that uncertainty nobody wants to live with. They need a decision from America sooner rather than later.
Well, even if the U.S. makes good on its tariff cuts, the new levy is still 15%. What sort of knock-on effects might these tariffs have on the wider Japanese economy, going beyond the automakers themselves?
Yeah, I think there's two things. The first one is obviously the immediate effect, which means that the car and car-related companies will have to cut their profit forecast by somewhere between 15 and 25%, depending on the company, depending on the exposure. But the strategic longer-term effect is going to be Japanese companies focusing on their own economy rather than investing elsewhere, actually building new factories, new facilities in Japan. Japan has become competitive because of the weak yen. Labor costs are relatively competitive. And from that perspective, ironically, the onshoring and business investment focusing on Japan could very well be the next big mega trend if Mr. Trump sticks to his tariffs.
Away from the domestic side of things, though, some argue that Japan's car industry already making concessions. They're moving some of the production to the U.S. Now, would that be enough to actually cushion the blow? Would the tariff still hurt Japanese firms?
Look, it's very interesting. The answer is that when you look at Honda in particular already, basically about 50% of its production does take place within North America. So you remember it was during the 1980s and 1990s that Japanese transplants really helped to revitalize the American car industry. But strategically, you also got to remember that the People's Republic of China remains a huge market and very important market. And you've seen, for example, Toyota Corporation a couple of months ago announcing a new commitment to build another factory in the People's Republic of China. So yes, the headlines are on the United States of America and the Trump tariffs, but strategically, the People's Republic of China and the Global South remain very, very important.
Well, speaking of Trump, now he says he wants to see more American cars on Japanese roads. Now, from Japan's side of things, is this really a viable offer? I mean, is it still a tough sell?
Look, you've been to Tokyo. It's an extremely tough sell. I mean, for one thing, the roads are just tiny. For another thing, it's a very aging society, and public infrastructure is fantastic. It's not about domestic car sales. That's not a growth market in Japan. And quite frankly, I think that this idea of selling big American pickup trucks in the United States is a nice headline story, but realistically, it's not going to happen, in my personal opinion. The real American focus, obviously, is on agricultural projects, where Japan faces a rice shortage and America could supply more rice. And then, of course, the big ticket item is all about defense-related and energy-related stuff, where, for example, liquefied gas imports could really make a dent in the bilateral trade balance if Japan were to purchase more.
So talking big picture, you don't think that this is really about cars, that although tariff threats a bigger part of a geopolitical economic negotiation between Washington and Tokyo?
No, absolutely. I mean, cars are obviously a nice headline-grabbing, segment. But, the reality is that you look at Japan's economy, the driver of growth is not the industrial sector, certainly not the car sector. The driver of growth is hospitality, is services, and to some extent, content-based technologies that utilize AI. That's where the growth is. Cars are headline grabbing because we all like to use them, certainly our generation or the older generation, but really the driver of growth comes from services, comes from content, and that's where Japan is razor focused and is really, really very competitive. It's not just Hello Kitty, there's a lot of Japan content that is going to start to become more globally competitive.
Jesper, appreciate those insights. Thank you. That was Jesper Cole, Expert Director at Monex Group. Over in China, investors digesting President Trump's latest comments, saying that he is, quote, getting very close to a deal with Beijing. Stocks continuing to recover from steep losses last week as sentiment around the Chinese economy improves. The Shanghai Composite closing out the day 0.45% higher, Shenzhen doing better at 0.64%. And Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index barely changed today as investors gear up for a slew of Chinese economic data as well as corporate results coming throughout the week. And that's it for business. Wei Su.
And thanks for that, Roland. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, Hiroshima marks 80 years of its nuclear bombing by the United States, with the city's mayor issuing a fresh warning to world leaders. This is East Asia tonight, and these are the headlines. U.S. President Donald Trump hints that a trade pact with China is close and that he will likely meet Xi Jinping if there is a deal. Two other Asian countries on tenterhooks over U.S. tariffs. Japan and South Korea still waiting on Washington to follow through on the pledge to reduce auto levies. Several detentions, but authorities in Taiwan still probing motives and the scope of an alleged theft of tech secrets at chip giant TSMC. Japan today marking 80 years since the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. An estimated 140,000 people died as a result of this bombing. Some consider the destruction of the city, coupled with the subsequent nuclear attack on Nagasaki days later, to have played a part in Japan's eventual surrender in World War II. The tolling of a bell at 8:15 a.m. local time at Hiroshima's Peace Memorial Park, the very moment the bomb exploded above the city in 1945. A record number of representatives attended this year's memorial, including Taiwanese and Palestinian officials. Prominent nuclear powers, though, such as Russia, China, and Pakistan, were not present. The Japanese Prime Minister repeating his government's pledge to work towards a world without weapons of mass destruction.
広島、長崎にもたらされた惨禍を決して繰り返してはなりません。非核三原則を堅持しながら、核兵器のない世界に向けた国際社会の取り組みを主導することは、唯一の戦争被爆国である我が国の使命であります。
Across the river, the iconic atomic bomb dome serving as a reminder of the horrors of nuclear war. Some survivors of the blast, with numbers falling with each passing year, have turned their experiences into very personal missions to educate future generations. Earlier, hundreds of anti-war protesters gathered at the Peace Memorial Park calling for the abolition of atomic weapons, while voicing opposition to the Japanese leaders' earlier advocacy of nuclear sharing. Now, that's to introduce weapons like these into the region as a form of deterrence. Professor Ren Zargenberg from Pennsylvania State University examined the likelihood of tensions on security driving nations to take the nuclear option.
A war between nuclear powers is something which is less likely, but as long as we have thousands of weapons and Harry Trigger alert, something like this can happen. We had what's called in in a genre broken arrow or almost accidental use or accident involving nuclear weapons, and we had a whole bunch of them during the Cold War. In case of a tactical use, this may happen, but a nuclear taboo, which Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the peace movement is very much responsible for, and this is for me the biggest achievement of the movement that is based and came out of Hiroshima, Nagasaki.
One individual who has been involved in these movements based and coming out of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is Professor Yuki Miyamoto from DePaul University. She's also director of the DePaul Humanities Center. Dr. Miyamoto, 2 decades spent on these movements to promote the idea of not using nuclear weapons in this world. What we just heard from that expert saying he sees the biggest achievement of movements like yours is the maintaining of this taboo on the use of nuclear weapons. Do you see that taboo still holding? And for you, is that the greatest achievement?
Good evening. Thank you for having me. I must say that it is nice to hear that nuclear taboo has been maintained by people who have worked for anti-nuclear movement or abolishing nuclear weapons. But I am not quite certain or confident that this nuclear taboo is holding up itself. And I think nowadays, even in Japan, there are some discussions going on that Japan should possess nuclear weapons for its own sake, for the protection. And so given that, I feel like the nuclear taboo, we cannot rely on nuclear taboo, but we have to establish a theory to deconstruct the nuclear deterrence theory.
All right, establishing this theory, I think you were at the commemoration ceremony today in Hiroshima, where the city mayor gave his speech in which he warned of an accelerating trend towards military build-up around the world. So this, I take it, is what you're referring to. In other words, suggesting that the trend towards maintaining this taboo on using nuclear weapons, that might in fact be weakening.
Yes, I'm afraid so. And also this commemoration has been organized by the city. So even though PM Ishiba came and delivered a speech, but main agency of this ceremony is Hiroshima City Mayor and also Governor Yuzaki, Hiroshima Governor Yuzaki. He also delivered a speech, and they have more, especially what Mayor Matsui mentioned. The U.S. and Russia have 90% of nuclear weapons currently existing on our planet. And in front of or in the presence of the representatives of each country, and also asking the Japanese government to be present at the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or Treaty of Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. So this is a kind of moment that city mayor, municipal government can make its own goal and made clear of its own agenda. And Governor Yuzaki also criticized the nuclear deterrence theory very clearly.
All right, a single weapon could wipe out millions. We've got more than 12,000 in the hands of, you mentioned US and Russia, but we've got 9 such nuclear powers. So not just the US, Russia, but smaller powers, which ironically might feel less constrained to use those powers. So this message that you have been trying to spread for nigh on 2 decades, or more than 2 decades, in fact, you have lamented in the past your suspicion that it is failing to resonate, that you need to bring it down from the abstract to humanize this message. Are you managing to do that?
Thank you for asking. I think it is important to talk about nuclear weapons in the context of national security or diplomatic concerns and relationships between the nation states, but at the same time, it can be very abstract. And what I would like to do is, following Governor Yuzuki's speech, I also have been criticizing nuclear deterrence theory, because nuclear deterrence theory is that nuclear weapons have protected us, right? And I just wondered, who are we referring to us? Let's say I've been living in Chicago for close to 30 years, and the US alone has conducted a nuclear test 1,030 times in its territory. And the Nevada test site, the US has conducted over 900 nuclear tests. And at the Marshall Islands, which became independent in 1986, but before that, since 1946, 67 nuclear tests have been conducted, including hydrogen bombs, which is equivalent to receiving 12 Hiroshima bombs almost every day. So given that, you might wonder if nuclear weapons have actually protecting whom, right? And the Marshall Islands back then were US territories, and Nevada, of course, people are living there in downwind areas. So I think nuclear deterrence theory is coming from those who believe that nuclear weapons are protecting us. But those people who have been harmed by the nuclear weapons and tests and productions, uranium mining, all those concerning production of nuclear weapons, they have been harmed, they have been injured, and nuclear weapons clearly have not protected them. So that's one way.
Pardon me for cutting it, Professor Miyamoto. A final question here. I understand what you're saying. So weapons testing in itself is harmful. But of course, the even greater danger, for example, a high-yield bomb now, awful to use these terms, but a high-yield bomb now is 80 times the size of the bomb that hit Hiroshima 80 years ago. And you have a very personal experience from that bombing. In fact, it directly both your mother as well as your cousin, who had not even at that point been born. How do you translate for you a very personal and genuine human suffering to countries who will then quote back at you, and so William Blake saying, mutual fear brings peace? Final question.
Right. So having experienced, I was born and grew up in Hiroshima, and my mom was 6 years old, a mile away from the hypocenter. And she didn't tell me about her experience, partly because she didn't want to revisit it, because it's not, pleasant. And also some hibakusha, referring to those people who are affected by the bomb. Hibakusha unfortunately faced discrimination from the fellow Japanese citizens. So she didn't want to hand down that kind of negative impact on me. But as far as I remember, she had menial disease in her 30s, and in her 40s, she was not able to produce healthy blood cells. So she had to get blood booster shots every other week. And in her 50s, she was diagnosed with cancer, and several years later, she passed away. So I have witnessed slow death. And she was only 6 years old. And having seen one member of the family falls ill, then it changes the entire family dynamics. And losing your loved one years later, I think no one deserves it. And I acknowledge that Japan also, Japan was aggressor, and 10% of the victims in the Hiroshima bombing came from the Korean Peninsula. But so no one deserves, even so, no one deserves that kind of slow death and long-term suffering. And I think I would like to mention that and bringing it into environmental issues, this is definitely environmental issues because the plutonium's half-life is 24,000 years. And also gender issues, economic issues. We are paying so much in Chicago or in the United States in order to maintain nuclear weapons. So I would like to talk about this is not only United Nations or diplomatic concerns, but also our everyday life. It concerns our everyday life.
Thanks, Professor
So
Yuki
that's
Miyamoto.
what I think.
Yeah, thanks for that. So in fact, the death toll from Hiroshima is not just, and just is I use it very lightly, 140,000. The toll spreads much more beyond that. Professor Yuki Miyamoto from DePaul University, thanks for joining us this evening. Still ahead on this bulletin, Thailand and Cambodia are set to meet again to discuss their conflict. It's an issue that has also seen China and the US wade into de-escalation efforts. We speak to Simon Tay from the Singapore Institute of International Affairs in just a moment. Stay with us. Authorities in Taiwan say 3 suspects have been arrested under the enhanced security law after the alleged theft of TSMC's cutting-edge chip technology. They include a former staff and an employee who is still working at the company when the alleged theft was uncovered. Local media are now focusing on who the suspects may have been stealing for. CNA's Victoria Jen.
The focus has now shifted to who is the main actor behind the alleged theft. Local media reports said investigators searched the Hsinchu office of a Japanese company that supplies chip-making equipment. That has sparked speculation that the stolen secrets may have been intended for Japan or an entity in Japan. But it's all just speculations for now, as prosecutors have not disclosed how the search is connected to the ongoing investigations. We know that prosecutors are using the amended National Security Act to bring charges. That law, updated in 2022, allows authorities to treat leaks of core technologies as national security threats rather than just cases of corporate theft, an offense that could carry up to 12 years of prison time and fines of more than $3 million. In the TSMC cases, the suspects are said to have attempted to leak confidential details about TSMC's 2-nanometer process. It's a new chip technology that's not yet in mass production, but crucial to future AI and supercomputing. According to Taiwan's National Science and Technology Council, under Taiwan's security law, stealing trade secrets of Taiwan's core technologies is a form of economic espionage. And according to a list that was updated just last year, so-called core technologies include chip processes below 14 nanometers, along with the key gases, chemicals, and equipment used to build them. It's not new for Taiwan's tech industry to be vigilant against rivals engaging in aggressive intelligence gathering, whether through legal means or otherwise. With TSMC's growing strategic importance to Taiwan's security, the latest case underscores that protecting such trade secrets is no longer just a business issue. Victoria Jen, CNA, Taipei.
Defense ministers from Thailand and Cambodia meet tomorrow in Malaysia on the final day of talks to keep alive a tenuous truce reached late last month with reported pressure from Washington and support from China.
Thailand and Cambodia agreed to a ceasefire at last week's talks hosted by Malaysia as the current ASEAN chair. The truce ended 5 days of heavy fighting at their border and has largely held up since. As agreed, the General Border Committee will meet, bringing together defense ministers from both sides. That meeting was initially supposed to be held in Phnom Penh, but last week it was moved to Malaysia at Thailand's request.
It was proposed on the 4th, right? And now that the day approaches, the Thai side deemed it more appropriate that it takes place in the third country, not in a country where we have issues with. So we had referred it back to Malaysia.
Apart from Malaysia, China and the US will also have representatives at the GBC meeting. US President Donald Trump had personally intervened. He made a ceasefire a precondition for tariff talks with the two ASEAN countries.
You see what we just did yesterday with two nations that we're trading with. And during the trade, I said, I'm not going to do any trade deal unless you guys settle your differences. And we got it settled in 24 hours.
Chinese diplomats have also been speaking to representatives from both sides. Foreign Minister Wang Yi met his Thai and Cambodia counterparts on the sidelines of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting last month. This was followed by another meeting in Shanghai after the ceasefire talks between Vice Foreign Minister Sun Weidong and representatives from Thailand and Cambodia. On the ground, Cambodian media have also reported that the Chinese ambassador visited affected areas as part of a tour conducted by Cambodian authorities for diplomats last week. Speaking to Cambodian media on the tour last Friday, he said, since the conflict broke out, China has been actively committed to promoting dialogue. The Chinese ambassador to Cambodia is a familiar name. Wang Wenbin used to be the face behind the podium at the Chinese Foreign Ministry press briefings before he became China's top diplomat in Cambodia last summer. An assignment that did not go unnoticed by China observers, who consider his deployment a significant one.
An associate professor and chairman of the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, Simon Tay, joins us. Professor Tay, if American sticks in the form of those tariffs were what brought Thailand and Cambodia to the table, are there any Chinese carrots we can expect that might keep them at the table?
Well, you're absolutely right. The outrageous, unconventional, certainly, attempt by Trump to link tariff deals with these truce has been a vital factor. I'm not quite sure why he's done it, perhaps to win a Nobel Peace Prize. China has actually much more substantive economic and political ties to both countries. It was a bit slower, but it's in a catch-up phase, and the participation of both these great powers is critical. But I do not want to underestimate the value of having ASEAN and ASEAN chairman Malaysia intervene and play a convening role.
I will get to ASEAN very quickly, but on the Chinese question, so there's absolutely no indication that China is involved in this recent confrontation. But China is Cambodia's biggest source of weapons and military needs. Thailand, on the other hand, a long-standing US ally. So their dependencies and the interests of these two much larger powers, very different.
I wouldn't read Thailand that way. Thailand is formally a military ally of the US, but this dates back to really the Vietnam War and its frontline status at that time. In recent years, the Chinese influence and economic participation in Thailand has grown tremendously. Many Chinese companies are there, many Thai companies are linked to Chinese investments. So I would say that both parties, both countries do have influence on both sides, and it's a good factor that China is involved. And it's a wonderful thing to see somehow America and China not quite working together, but having a handle on a critical problem.
All right, they both have interest in seeing this stability. ASEAN as well. I heard ASEAN chair, Malaysia's Prime Minister, yesterday saying this conflict not only affects the two countries, but also tarnishes ASEAN's reputation if it is not resolved. Malaysia, as ASEAN chair, stepping up very adroitly at the right time to mediate on this final question.
Very true. I think that ASEAN has had a legacy of peace. As I described in my recent book, Island in the World, looking at Singapore's perspectives of our region, one valuable contribution, a dividend, is of relative peace, lack of conflict in ASEAN. And this skirmish should not be taken lightly. It's wonderful that ASEAN chairman Anwar has actually intervened very quickly and decisively. And others provide a framework. There's an upcoming ASEAN ministers meeting. There will be efforts on both sides to really put this skirmish back into place. But there are also real limits of whether great powers or ASEAN can do. The roots of this are really very domestic and lead to the leadership of Cambodia and Thailand. It's up to them to keep the peace.
Simon Tay there, bringing us up to date and outlining this problem and giving us context as well. Associate Professor and Chairman of the Singapore Institute of International Affairs, thanks so much for joining us this evening. That's Wednesday's edition of East Asia Tonight. Headlines anytime at cne.asia. Plus, we're on Facebook and YouTube.